Welcome to The Intentional Way, where literally every moment is a step towards purposeful living. I'm Bryan Hatch, here to explore the power of intention with you. Learn from our guests who embody intentionality. I'm glad you're here with me. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of The Intentional Way. I'm your host, Bryan Hatch, and as always, I'm really excited for the guests I bring on here. I'm so blessed to have really cool people that I've either met or been associated with in my life, and today is no exception to that rule. Our guest today is Tiffany Moser, and she is a marriage and family therapist that specializes in individual trauma. She is someone that I admire for so many reasons. I've heard her speak in a couple of different occasions, and it's really hit home for me. And so I'm excited for you to understand intention through her eyes as we get into what she does. So welcome, Tiffany, to the show.
Oh, thank you, Bryan. That was a very generous welcome. Thank you.
Well, I'm proud of the guests that we have on here, and you're absolutely no different. I'm excited.
I'm excited to be here too.
I like to start off with a little bit of fun. So what's something, people could find you online. They can find you on their website, find you at your practice, which we'll link and make sure that everybody can get to you that way. But what's something that people wouldn't necessarily know about you that they should know about you?
Like personally, like growing
anything
up?
You want, anything you want.
People always go crazy when I tell them that I have 10 siblings.
Oh, okay.
And so when they meet me, they don't necessarily picture me in a big family for some reason. So when I tell them that, everyone's shocked by that when I say that.
Yeah. So growing up in a house of 10 siblings, I've seen you with the majority of the 10, I think.
Probably, yeah.
Because you've sung.
Yeah.
Where did you fit in the lineup?
I was third.
Third, okay.
Yeah, so one of the older ones.
Okay, near the top there.
Yep.
And how was that growing up with?
I think you've heard my story a little bit. Is my dad struggled with mental health issues and we were very poor. So a lot of scarcity growing up, but my siblings were everything. We were best friends and it got us through a lot of the hard times. So when we think back on our childhood, it's a very positive experience, even though there was hard things that we went through. I think it served us in a positive way. My parents were also growth oriented, and so that helped us as well. So I think just looking back on my childhood, I feel ultimately just a feeling of love and belonging. So I feel very lucky and blessed for that. So.
That's awesome. So you've said a couple times already in the few minutes we've been talking here about growth minded. Tell me a little more about what that means to you.
So as you said, I'm a marriage and family therapist, so I also look at everything through that lens as well, a therapist lens, so I can't escape it. I think of growth as a continual process of assessing and focusing and just building upon as struggle comes your way, growing and learning and building upon that growth and just continuing that instead of a victim mindset, which so many people come and struggle with that. Of course, I've struggled with that in my life as well. Feeling like you're getting put upon and that life is acting on you instead of you feeling in control. Being able to switch out of that narrative and that mindset to, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? What have I experienced in the past? What skills have I built in the past to be able to deal with something like this? So I feel like when you approach it that way, it makes life bearable and you're able to learn and grow and be more intentional with your growth and the direction of your life.
Oh, that's awesome. So the continual progress in that mindset versus we've heard, at least a lot of people I feel like have heard that victim mindset. Maybe we all play that role a little bit in our lives. So tell us a little about your practice. I'm really interested because I think there's so many things we could discuss in that. I know you can't discuss personal situations with your clients. I don't want to do that. Yeah. Tell us a little more about what it is like to work with people that are going through individual trauma, in addition to what you already do. So,
I first started, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I first started in the DCS and foster care system. And so it was very challenging. I feel like I got thrown in the fire way more than my other cohort members because they got kind of easier internships as far as couples and pretty menial, easy relationship issues. And then I had to deal with the most horrific experiences that children go through, them getting separated from their families and sometimes reunification, sometimes dealing with the foster families and then the adoptive families. So I kind of got put in a scenario in which I had to be extremely intentional about being able to hear hard things, building my window of tolerance for being able to hear hard things and still show up for people. And I remember first few months of that internship, it was a 40-minute drive from the location to my house. So
Okay.
I would listen to these stories all day long and be there for these people and do therapy with my clients, and then just cry all the way home because of all the emotional weight that requires to be able to hear those kinds of stories. And I remember being able to talk and give support for those people, but I also had support. I was able to reach out to my supervisors and my trainers, and to be able to build tolerance for that, I think has helped me so much in my personal career, because I feel like a lot of these therapists come out of the gate and they haven't hardly experienced anything difficult as far as treatment goes. So it's a privilege because I've been able to grow that window of tolerance, because I was intentional about it, getting the support that I needed and the training that I needed. I feel that it really is sacred space when someone's sharing their most, I remember my sister said, don't you get frustrated with people that just like, why are you doing what you're doing? And I said, when someone's sharing something and being that vulnerable with you, it's the last thing you want to feel. It's the last thing you feel naturally, because it's just such a privilege to be in that space with someone. So that's what it's like for me. And I feel rejuvenated by my profession, not weighed down by it. So I feel blessed in that aspect as well.
And that was, how long was that? The internship took years, took months? What was it like?
So the internship, that's a good question, was a year
Mhm.
of, you had to get 300 client contact hours. So within that year, I did 300 client contact hours with the DCS and foster care cases. And then I was switched over and mentored by Dan Oakes. He's pretty well known in the area, but he specialized in compulsive sexual disorders. And so I became his teammate in helping. If there was a spouse involved, I would see the spouse, and they were usually highly traumatized. So then it geared me more towards adult male and female trauma treatment, even though I've treated families, I've treated teens, I've treated children in all sorts of scenarios, but that's my specialty now, just because of where the direction of who I was mentored by and the population he treated.
Yeah. So in that first year, as you're getting those 300 hours, you were meeting with a range with category of people you told me. That is like kids, or this is the parents of the kids? I quite understand that.
Everyone.
Everybody.
So I was meeting with the kids. I was meeting with the parents that had been separated from them. I was meeting with the foster care parents and the parents, with adoptive parents and the kids together. So, and teens. I saw a lot of teens at my internship as well. So because I'm a marriage and family therapist, you can only get your required hours by doing family work. So it's actually the perfect setting for that. So everything's from a systems perspective. So we would look at everything from the family system. So we very rarely treat just the individual in that type of a setting, because it's more effective for the child and the teen to have the whole family involved, so that you can address the entire family system. So
yeah, that's interesting, because I can, as I hear you say that, the problem isn't just with the kid, independent of if they were separation from parents, but if there's a challenge with the child, there has to be some major connection with the parent, whether it's broken or whether it's strong, but something's going on there.
And you're able to address whatever the kid's experiencing or manifesting, maybe symptomology and behaviors, from way more effectively if you've got the whole family involved and talking, getting everyone on board, instead of just, oftentimes people want to just drop their kids off or teen off and be like, fix them. But we know from the research and the data that working with the whole family system, and it's not a way to point fingers in any way, but it's just more effective to get the whole family system involved and be able to help whatever the child is struggling with on a family level.
So that's like the first year. And then you started going out with Dan Oakes and working on the spouse of traumatic situations. And this matters to me because of what I want to talk to you about, but what I want to get down the path of,
you kind of shifted from the DCS, you said, and foster situations into now more of the spouse or the partner of the person that's being affected by what Dan Oakes was treating or his therapy. So tell me a little more about how you go from there. I see the bridge of trauma, but how do you go from where that was to now where you are today?
During that time in my mentorship, I had to still have family hours. All the individual hours, actually, if you exceed a certain point, they don't count towards your full licensure. So I was kind of limited to how many individuals I could treat. So I did see a lot of couples, a lot of families for other issues as well. But because of who I was mentored by, I got exposed to that. And then when I was fully licensed about 3 years later, that was my love. That was my passion. After having practiced and served and treated all the populations, my passion really lied with the individual adult trauma treatment, and males and females. So it just became my love and my focus just out of preference.
So why did that become your love? I'm very interested.
That's a good question. I feel that I have a talent for connecting with individuals and motivating them in ways that is growth oriented. And I can do that in a couple setting as well, but I feel like I had more impact as a professional in the individual setting. I could see that with the EMDR that I'm trained in, which not all
I don't know what
therapists.
EMDR.
So it's eye motor desensitization reprocessing. It's one of the most effective treatments for trauma.
Okay.
So I went and got certified in that. Oftentimes I felt my hands were tied as a therapist prior. You feel so deeply for your clients and when they're struggling. And I felt that as soon as I got that certification, and I'm also a certified trauma specialist as well through the state, I really felt my clients' progress just significantly improve as soon as I was able to offer that treatment for them. So it just felt very fulfilling I could see it was fulfilling for them and for me professionally as well. So it just became my love and my passion. And some people love couples treatment and some, it just really is what you connect with personally. But I really loved that. And I feel that I serve the therapy world best in that arena.
Okay, so can you put our feet on the ground for just a minute? Tell us you've told us why you love and why you connect with that and that you see the outcome. You got certified, you did the extra work to actually see bigger or faster or at least complete progress the way you would define it. Tell us, what would that mean if I was going through that? Or give us a scenario that doesn't have to be an actual person, but give us, what does that mean?
So people come in and oftentimes they don't realize even that they have trauma. They just know that they're struggling. They have depression. They have anxiety.
Okay.
Maybe they've tried to be intentional and set goals in their life, but they just feel like they're stuck. That's a common word that people say, I'm stuck. And then I follow the therapeutic procedure is to go through an assessment process where they tell me their story. And I'm listening for certain things. And usually there's something in their family of origin that happened that has determined now the way they're responding to life currently. And so when we're able to make sense of that and make that connection, it feels like a whole world opens up for my clients because they feel like something was broken in them where really it's usually some way that they learned to adapt or cope with whatever situations and scenarios were going on in their families that help them survive or help them to be successful in a situation they had very little control over. But unavoidably, we carry those patterns of interacting and coping through our life if we don't intentionally have the insight to see them. And it's really hard to see them sometimes without professional help. And when we are able to make sense of it, oh, I'm acting this way because, I learned how to do this with my sister. Or back when this happened to my family, I became the rescuer. I became the peacemaker. And so I feel like I'm doing that. It's now not serving me well in my adult relationships and my adult professional life. Being able to heal that trauma through various treatments. EMDR is one of the most effective, but I do CBT and narrative and EFT. I have bunch of approaches that we use, but we'll do EMDR. And then then they can start being more intentional because that stuff's not getting in their way. Then when we're talking about purpose and the next steps that they can take, they can actually be successful at, because these subconscious patterns of behavior aren't getting in their way of being intentional and being the best version of themselves.
Yeah. So give us an example of one of those, meaning there, and I know that listeners will have various things, but we all listen to things and we realize, oh, I have something like that. It's not that. But can you give us an example of maybe one of those types of interactions or something that happened, as you mentioned maybe briefly, but can you give us an example of what that might do to a person?
An example maybe that you're looking for, I'm not sure if this is quite what you're looking for, but maybe as a young boy, he had maybe an abrasive or an aggressive father, and he learned to just keep his head down and mind his business and mind his P's and Q's and not ruffle any feathers. That's how he survived and coped, kind of an overbearing, aggressive father figure.
Mm-hmm.
So now, unbeknownst to him, maybe he gets into jobs and he does okay until maybe he has to interact with an aggressive, overbearing individual. And then maybe he doesn't have the boundaries that he needs to have. Maybe he doesn't speak up for himself now. Maybe he wants to be successful, but because of certain personalities and, in his surrounding, it keeps him stuck.
Okay.
And they'll come in, and that's what I'm listening for. I'm listening for frustrations in their work environment, in their intimate relationships, kid relationships, family of origin relationships back. And then I'll do an assessment of their childhood, and we can usually make a connection somehow. How did you respond to that in the past? How do you feel like you're responding to that now?
Okay. If I can equate it just at a quick example, I remember talking to someone recently in my life, and they said that they really struggled when their kids cried.
Mm.
And this guy I was talking to, he said, I realized that it was something from my childhood, and maybe he doesn't work with someone like you. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that he has. I'm just saying, he was talking about it. He said, I remember that this thing happened in my life, and every time that I'd get in trouble, later my dad would come and cry and say sorry for what he did to make it wrong or right or whatever. So they equated crying with that kind of trauma. So
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to pull out some idea. So that's an example, and you've provided one of some things that happen that create a subconscious trap or a stuckness, as you described it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's interesting.
So if people come in and they want to be more intentional in their life, or they want to build healthier habits, a lot of people will go to counseling for years and still repeat the same patterns over and over. And they'll be like, I've been to therapy and it works for a little bit, but then I fall back into those same patterns. It's usually because there's like a hierarchy of treatment.
Okay.
And if you're not seeing the right therapist, that can impact it too. But if we don't do the deep stuff, we're really just addressing the first order change. And so we'll make a few tweaks and we'll be able to improve for a little bit. But if there's trauma, it's usually indicated by someone consistently slipping back into old patterns. So if we first treat the trauma, addictions first. So if someone comes in with an addiction, that's what we treat first. We make sure they get sobriety in that area, then trauma, and then we can do the fun stuff.
Okay.
The habit changes and the goal-oriented type of treatment. And then they are the prognosis for sustainability is much higher if they're taken through that process. Because most people, like you said, aren't thinking about, why am I yelling at my kids when they're crying? They don't go back and go, well, maybe it's because I've made this association to crying from my past. But we've learned, the data is very clear, that our family of origin is the only relationships that reflect our adult existence now.
Interesting.
And so being able to realize that's kind of a mirror into what we're experiencing now, and then trying to make sense of that. And I feel like it's work that all of us can do. And people go, well, I had a good childhood. And I'm like, you could have had a great childhood, but how did you adapt to certain things? How did you adapt to stress? What role did you play in your family? What was your sibling responsibility in the home? And we'll often see that if we haven't kind of made sense of that and learned to maybe deal with life in a different way as an adult, that can impact us in limiting ways.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe, follow, and download our episode. Your support allows us to bring more intentional guests just like this, and it means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the episode.
That's interesting. I was talking with a family member, distant family member, and we were talking about, like, I wonder if there's somebody in our generations back that carried this through, because we both struggle with something that's similar, which is interesting. That didn't seem like inherently needed to be, but we both had similar disattitudes around something that was going. It's interesting.
So there is a genetic piece to it. There's they call it the family projection process. And there is that piece. Everyone's like, is it environment? Is it nurture? Is it biology? Yeah. And it's both. So it can be passed down traits. Trauma can be passed down through generations. We might be carrying some trauma from our ancestors. If it's these stories that are told over, know that anyone that was in the Auschwitz concentration camps in Germany, not just Auschwitz, but they would then talk about it, and they could possibly pass down some traits that would be scarcity and trauma oriented, which understandably, so we can have that generational trauma, and those generational traits, we know addiction gets passed down. If we don't become aware of that pattern and stop it intentionally, there's that word again, it can keep perpetuating through families and generations.
It's interesting. So I'm going to out myself a little bit, and I don't know if maybe listeners are feeling similar. I really truly love that therapy is more mainstream. It used to be, especially for, in my opinion, especially for males, if I go see that, then I'm weak. And now it's acceptable, but I'm not saying it's always accepted. But even then, I've thought of therapy as a way to go talk and work out things. But it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is the deepest level of personal development. It's the deepest level of figuring out, because if you do all the right things, if you're the doer and you're still not finding the results, then there may be something that is holding you back, as you said.
And if there's listeners that have done therapy before and haven't had the results that they're wanting, or have noticed that they've kind of gone back to past patterns of coping, they may want to look at some trauma therapy and a therapist that specializes in that, because there's a lot of therapists that specialize in talk therapy, kind of what you said that you kind of envision. You sit and talk. And,
I see it positively, but that was kind of my thought. Yeah.
Yep. So that would be traditional talk therapy, which is effective. But what I've seen is about a year of talk therapy is about equal to 2 months of trauma, 2 to 3 months of trauma therapy. And a lot of people don't want to stay in therapy for a year.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, it's a huge time investment and it's expensive. And so the more efficient and the more effective usually gets people bought in, and they see results more quickly, which then keeps them more dedicated and more invested in the process. I think that's what I've seen.
Yeah. Do you hear from previous patients, like years in the past now? Do they reach out to you?
Once in a while, and sometimes I run into them if they're in the locale, and it's up to them. I would never acknowledge them, but they can. If they want to acknowledge me, then I love it. But I did see someone just recently. We were at a huge community event, and she came running up to me, and she said, "Look at me."
Oh, that's
She's like,
cool.
"Tiffany, look at me." She's like, "I'm happy."
Cool.
And that was 4 years after I had seen her. And you do wonder, about your clients, but ethically, legally, we don't reach out to them.
Sure.
We're not going to be, how's it going?
Yeah.
We don't pander after our clients, obviously, but I do get little blessings and gifts like that once in a while. And to be able to see that sustained over time. When she came into me, she was just a broken shell of a woman going through a horrific divorce of someone, very abusive relationship. She was an amazing client. She had the courage to go back to her family of origin. It was very toxic, very abusive as well. Being able to do that work and then doing the EMDR and then intentional work as she healed from that divorce and being able to be there for her kids the way that she wanted to be. And then they're gone. And then I don't know most of the time. So it is a real blessing to be able to be given a gift like that. And I just thought that was so funny. She's like, I'm happy, I'm happy. And that was a real blessing.
Awesome.
And a testament to her and how hard she worked, because she really did.
Well, I'm going to say it. You haven't asked me to say this. I'm going to say it. If anybody out there knows Tiffany and worked with her at some point, reach out. Not because she's looking to get more business from you, but it's really nice to see that loop, that circle of a loop. So
it is, yeah.
what I didn't realize that I could see it logically that you're not going to go checking up on them,
Yeah.
but how beautiful that would be to hear from them every once in a while because of the work you're doing. So thanks for letting me go route. That's so interesting. So tell us a little about, of all the things you're working through, what are some of the trends? Now I'm going to get into some intentionality. This is our conversation, but when we look at like intentional, people are coming to you because they're either stuck, as you've said, they're finding something that's not working, or they're bothered, or they recognize something in their past or in their current situation. How does that link up to intention? That's a passion of mine, of being able to talk about things that are really important. And it all comes, and for me, stems from intention. Because if we wander through life just letting things happen as they happen, we'll get what we get. And that's fine. Not all of it's bad. Not all of it's good.
True.
But at the same token, if we walk through it with some intent, like, oh, I want this, I want to go do that. And it's not that they have to have a goal for everything. It's just, I have thoughts about what I want this to be like. So tell us about how those trends, or what have you seen in all of your profession that would make us learn something about intention?
Well, intention, obviously, if someone's coming in for help, they had enough intention to get some support. And so we first highlight that, because it takes a lot of courage to reach out and get support in that way. And even if you're not reaching out for therapy, reaching out to a friend or a family member or someone you trust, that takes a lot of courage. And that takes an intention alone. Like, I need to feel better. So that's intention. So I love the foundation of your podcast, because I feel like intention is a foundation of everything. Insight and intention is what helps people progress. And so being intentional enough to reach out and get help is such a big deal. Are you familiar with Malika Chopra? Her work? She specializes in intent, and she's the daughter of Deepak Chopra.
Oh, I know Deepak.
So she says intentions are from the soul, goals are from your mind. She said, and we make goals to maybe achieve what our overall intentions are. But when people are coming in for help, their intention is that they've got a deep desire from the soul, I feel. And anyway, I don't know if I answered your question or not. But
why does it take so much courage to come in and start? Why does it take so much?
I think that the stigma is getting less, like you referenced, but just, I think it's a lot easier for most of us to offer help than to be able to admit that we are in a position where we maybe are not functioning, or that we are stuck. I feel like sometimes people have to get to a pretty low place. And so it does take a lot of courage to go in and say, I feel stuck. I need help. That takes, I think it's some of the most courageous words in the English language is, I'm hurt and I need help.
Yeah. So I'm just going to ask this. This sounded interesting in my mind, at least. We'll find out if it is. But is it that people hit a proverbial rock bottom that motivates them to do something? And we're talking about seeing you, right? I totally believe with you that it takes an immense amount of courage, and that's something that not to overlook. But my question is, at the origin, is it that they finally felt rock bottom enough that they wanted to do something about it? Or did they assess their situation and say, gosh, man, I got to do something else? Did they create it, or was it created out of their pain?
And I feel that because of my specialty, I do get people that are they feel pretty desperate, and they're pretty rock bottom, just because I specialize in trauma. So they're actually looking for someone that specializes in trauma. It's usually because they're experiencing something very severe.
Okay.
I feel like there's lots of populations that reach out, not because they're in the depths of turmoil, but because they just want to, maybe they feel like they're floundering a little bit in business and need a life coach, or they just need a seminar, or they need something to kind of, kick them forward and get them a little bit more, energy towards progression or whatever. So in my population, I feel like I do see those people they have reached rock bottom. And so they do reach out, but I think it takes courage no matter what to reach out for support. And that should always be highlighted and revered and respected.
Yeah. So then you're working with people that are in just very interested to know, are they, you said sometimes they come in, they don't know, but they're in a rock bottomish state. So they've identified that something's off.
Yeah.
Something big is off, or something did occur.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an idea? Those that recognize they've had trauma, go see Tiffany. Anybody's listening, if you had trauma, and you go see Tiffany. But if you're stuck, how would you identify a person like that? Give me maybe an example of someone who maybe felt bad, or maybe felt rock bottom. I don't know. Felt like they were stuck, like you described, but didn't associate it with the trauma that saw you. Because I think the easy connection had this big event. Gosh, I need to fix it. I need someone's help, and I can't manage this myself. Making that so logically sound. I know there's a lot more emotion in that, but they come to you. What about the people that aren't quite sure about the trauma?
I think something's usually happening in their life that's making it intolerable. Maybe they're in a very toxic relationship pattern, or they go from relationship to relationship that is toxic or ends the same way. Maybe they're sabotaging it and they've noticed that they are the common denominator. Maybe they keep gravitating towards the same type of individual that ends up treating them poorly. Maybe they're really aggressive and can't handle their anger, and they've been, I've gotten court-ordered clients as well that are turn to violence to cope. So they'll come in sometimes for those reasons and haven't made the connection to their past, but we can I haven't yet not been able to find a connection to the past of why we're behaving in these ways. But it's mostly because people are stuck in some significant way. And so they come in for that reason. And then I'm the one that usually highlights help me, as through the assessment, we're able to make those connections to patterns from the past.
Okay. The word comes to my mind as shortcut, but there's no shortcuts, but it's a matter of you help them make the connections. They have to connect those dots, but you make it apparent to them. I'm interested to know, when someone is in that mindset, they've figured out, we keep talking about like them coming to see you, but it sounds like that's very intentional to me, of a person looking at their scenario and saying, either I'm bouncing from relationship to relationship, I'm angry when I shouldn't be, or whatever, but they're looking at themselves. And I think that's part of awareness. That's a piece of an intention, is you have to be aware. If you're doing things and you're not aware of it, you just go through it. I think we all know people, and even myself, we do things habitually without a second thought because that's just always the way we've done them. But these people have slowed down enough, or something has happened to them enough, they've had to look.
Yeah.
How do you help people look and become more aware?
They're usually, when they're coming to see me, they're putting a lot of time and a lot of financial investment. So it isn't like I'm having to force people to take a look. They're very willing at that point. That part has already been passed. They want to know what in the heck is happening. Why does this keep happening to me? And so the discovery part is, it's eye-opening, and it's usually very empowering for them. It isn't, I have to look at this and they don't want to. So it's not so much that I have to force them to by the time they come to me. I think that frustration's probably with loved ones prior, wanting them to look at certain things or wanting them to notice certain behavior patterns. That frustration probably belongs more to the intimate relationships prior to them coming to me. By the time they come to me, they're ready.
Okay.
They're ready to work.
So then maybe unveil a little bit. I recognize that we're not trying to learn every piece of the puzzle of what you do, but give us a little bit of an example of what we could do, or how we could become more intentional in the way that you teach people to do it. Obviously individually, considering their specific scenarios, but how could the rest of us learn how to be more intentional and find those things that you found and start working on?
It's such a good question. And I would refer to Dan Siegel's work. He's the attachment expert. That's Dan Siegel. And he has written lots of books, and he does a lot of narrative work, as well as Paul Conti. And if people want to start investigating this on their own, doing this narrative work would be writing your story down.
Okay.
And writing your experience in your childhood and different relationship dynamics and how you learn to cope with those different relationships, how you survived in different scenarios. And like I said, it doesn't have to be that your family was so dysfunctional. I had a client come in and she said, I don't really have any trauma in my life. But she had a significant eating disorder and she acted out compulsively sexually to a point where it was compromising her profession and her personal life. But we went back and there was a significant time when her mother fell ill when she was 2, 3, and 4 years old. And she said, I remember just sitting on the couch and my mom would push in Disney VHSs and I'd watch it all day long. And so we know from the research that she wasn't intentionally abused or neglected, but because of the dynamics of the mother's illness, she was neglected at a very imperative time in the developmental process and attachment, when attachment is supposed to be being formed. And she got no real love and care and attention just because of the dynamics of the illness, not the fault of the mom's or anyone else's. It just was what presented. And she didn't realize how significantly that could have impacted her and the habits and the behaviors she then utilized to cope, to feel like she was in control when, as a child, she felt so helpless.
So she found that was an instance, or for a few years, that was an instance that caused some disconnect. Now, what is she, or what do you advise those kind of people? Or we find, okay, I write my story and I'm making this so simple. I recognize that it takes effort and energy. Anybody that's going to do the work that you're talking about, even for themselves, there's got to be some time spent, but I write my story. I get clear on some things, my dynamic relationship, what I had to deal with. How did I survive in my family? I identify some things. Now, how do I use that to help me get over some of the things that I've struggled with?
So then the important piece is then making connections to how I survived as a child, or what dynamics impacted me significantly in my childhood and adolescence, and how I'm noticing those patterns, past traumas, how they're showing up, what triggers me, what behaviors am I exhibiting, the way I learned to cope and handle things in my family of origin, how is that not serving me now? And being able to make those connections in present relationships now. And some people can write that story and it starts becoming really clear to them. It's pretty obvious because some people have the gift of insight and introspection, so they can really make those connections more easily. And sometimes it benefits people to have a therapist helping them with that, just because they have that added training to be able to see those patterns, recognize those patterns, and being able to say, well, do you think it might be because of this? And it's kind of cool to see light bulbs go on. And I think even after having some therapy, it's easier to do that afterwards, following why we might be responding certain ways to certain stimuli in our life.
And in no way am I trying to shortcut the process. If anybody needs to see you, I want them to go see you. I just think for those that are maybe think that we haven't had trauma, how do we start uncovering and figuring out? If we identify some of the behaviors in the past that are showing up now, I've gotten some understanding of what it is that happened in my childhood or in my family of origin, and I'm seeing how it's showing up now. What can I do with that? I see, okay, there's a pattern and it's still showing up. How do you help somebody, or how could I disassociate that I don't want to do that anymore? Because if it's ingrained subconsciously, how do I become aware enough that I can turn it off or change it?
You just said it right there. Once it switches from the subconscious to the conscious, you're much more effective at going, okay, now here's some other options that I could try. But because, like you said, most of us go aimlessly through life and don't really realize these patterns in the way we're responding to certain things. But if we're able to start making sense and making those connections, then you are bringing it from the subconscious to the conscious. And then a phrase we always like to say is, if you can name it, you can tame it. So if it becomes something that, okay, that makes sense, I understand that. Now, what are some options for me? These are other behaviors I could start trying to implement. That's where the intention comes into play really heavily, is really getting intentional about changing that pattern and changing the way I've responded to that in the past, building additional skills. Maybe you need to build some boundary skills. Maybe you need to build some communication skills, build some assertive skills and being able to handle conflict and confrontation. That's a hard thing for a lot of people, and they don't realize how much that's impacting their life, not being able to handle conflict. So being able to address those things in more of a, okay, I know my problem now. Now what are some other options? That becomes a much easier process once the connections have been made.
Okay. So as it becomes apparent, then we can change it. And I think there's at least a premise there that I have to believe that I can change it instead of that victim mentality of, oh, well, I found it. Yep, there it is.
Yeah.
And it's still showing up. I guess it'll never change. So there has to be a belief in it. And that's the fun about intentionality is you can do anything. You can change any thought and pattern and belief. It's my belief. I don't know all things, but the way I've seen it is it's changeable. But there might need to be a break from the way you saw it to the way you see it.
And there does need to be a perspective change. Like you said, some people stay in that place of, well, that's just the way I am. Yeah, I do that. That's the way I am. And that's the most limiting type of response when you're getting feedback from maybe loved ones or coworkers or, friends of certain ways they're experiencing you that they maybe don't appreciate, or it's maybe been the reason for ending certain relationships or opportunities. We need to want to listen to those things instead of, well, that's just the way I am, or it was them, or we're going to project and point fingers and blame, instead of having the courage and the intentionality to be introspective. And that's really a choice and is down to each individual's desire to really believe that change is possible. And the data is that our brains have plasticity. And that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, it's false, where our brains are full of plasticity till we die. And that to me is so hopeful. We're not stuck in these patterns and we can learn new skills. And that is the truth. These other negative narratives are lies and they're beliefs that keep us stuck. And so hopefully people can hear this and realize that no matter what they're experiencing, there is data and support and research that guarantees that if they put the effort in, there can be progress forward.
So how does a person, come back to the beginning of our conversation in a very good way, in my opinion, but how does a person, why do we avoid things that we know we need to change? Why do we avoid it? I know I need to change this. I know this isn't working, but I'll just give it another couple of years.
This is going back to the systemic lens of homeostasis. When there's a system, it runs in a certain way. And anytime a wrench is put in that system, it ruins homeostasis for a little bit until the system, refigures a way to work around that now change. And just as humans, we gravitate towards homeostasis. So if we are used to and accustomed to certain things, we have to be willing to put enough time into building that different system and then seek that homeostasis over a period of time. And I think that the known suffering is oftentimes preferred because it's scary to think of new possibilities and new ways of interacting and responding. And I feel like that is very human. And I think all of us have experienced that in one way or the other. But being able to realize how, like you said, there has to be a switch of some sort. And people often do have to get to a point where they're realizing how destructive or dysfunctional this particular behavior is before they'll maybe entertain thoughts of change. But there are a certain group of people that don't have to get to that point and can start noticing on their own that even though this is familiar, it's not helping me and I need to do something different. And I can see the way it's impacting my relationships in the home or at work, or just me personally, my personal dialogue in my head, that my inner critic, what's going on in there.
Yeah. What a sad situation that we prefer the suffering we are in versus the unknown suffering. I think I identify that as honest, but what a bummer that we do that.
Yeah.
As opposed to, it could possibly be amazing when we figure it out, as opposed to keep the suffering.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to just put a plug in again. If you have any reason to go see Tiffany, or while we're listening to this, you thought, man, I should go see her. Well, we're going to make sure that you find her on the notes of the show. You can get that. But I tell you what, it seems like back to where we started, there must be courage. There must be courage to say, I'm putting my foot down in this area of my life. I'm not going to continue the apathy or the stress or the struggle that I've been going through. I'm going to seek help. And so we have to take the courage and take that step. And I think that's the foundation of intentionality.
Absolutely.
Tiffany, what else would you share? What else to round out our conversation that would be useful that listeners understand? I think that I've learned so much today, and I don't want to miss something else that's in there.
Well, there's so much we could say.
Yeah, I know.
How much time do you have? Just kidding. If you're at home and you're not needing any therapy or whatever, because there's nothing really significant going on, what I tell everyone is start being intentional with your mornings and making sure that you're getting, and I follow Hal Elrod's, I think I've told you, his SAVERS acronym of the silence, affirmations, visualizations, exercise, and scribing or journaling. I wake up every morning. I do that every single morning. I recommend all my clients do it. Anyone that asks me, where can I start or what should I be doing? I tell them, start your day that way, get some morning sun, be very intentional about your morning. And that can help boost mental wellness more than anything exercise, what we're eating, all of those things, sleep, making sure we're getting enough sleep. If we start in that kind of that foundational place, because when someone comes in, we assess functioning first, just normative, basic functioning. And I feel like that model of being intentional about really getting that basic functioning in place and really getting that dialed in, then we get so much back from that in regards to blessing our families and our window of tolerance for life in general. So that's what I would say. That's what I'd recommend to anyone. If you're not in a place where you have had significant trauma or need therapy for anything significant going on, at least start that. Atomic Habits is a great resource for building that intentionality. Hal Elrod's work with The Miracle Morning. Just starting there, and I feel like that boosts mental wellness more than anything else, is if people are intentional about that time in the morning to start their day.
I find that really interesting that of all the things you could have said, you talked about starting your day off that way. If anybody hasn't read the book, it's a great book. It's a great book. We've had experiences in my home recently around just that, the morning routine and how to make that difference.
Yeah.
So of all the things you could have said, you chose that. Why starting in the morning makes the biggest difference in your perspective versus meditating versus getting exercise? I recognize that there's many versions of most of that in that morning.
Yeah.
But why that as opposed to any other of the things you could have pitched?
And it does include the mindfulness and the grounding and the silence. All of that encompasses that as well. And that's why I like that model. And the scribing, I pick that because that sets the tone for your entire day. So your intention is positive from the very beginning. And I also, I have a freedom journal, it's called. Brandon Bouchard uses that for his Miracle Morning. He does the Miracle Morning too, which I like that because you set an intention for the day and you do what your focus is, what your objectives are to achieve the goals you have for that day. Because there's so many layers and levels for intention. Sometimes doing those micro intentions to those very basic levels and being able to take your morning, then your day, you start being in charge of your day instead of your day just happening. And you have a mindset from the very beginning, from when you wake up, of how you're going to approach that day. I feel has more of an impact than anything else I could have said.
Yeah, it really comes down to that. If you decide that these are the things I'm going to get done and you do them before anybody else can bother you, and that may mean you have to change your morning.
Yep.
But if you do that, then at least you started off with, I checked off some things off of the boxes that matter to me that helped me start. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Tiffany, it has been a pleasure having you here. Is there
It's been a
anything
pleasure
else
being
that I have left on the table that we should discuss?
No, I don't. Well, just have to come back sometime.
Oh, you're welcome. You're totally welcome. I think it's been a great opportunity to learn from, I literally, the thing that I'm seeing is that the work you're doing is deep personal development. And I don't mean that to sound surfacey. I mean that to be very honorable to the work you do. It's the deep work. It's the stuff that really matters as opposed to it just being surface. We walk through our day like people, we just go through it in a simplistic way. Our brain is wired to make short circuits so that we just keep doing the same things we're doing.
Absolutely.
We've got to break those patterns if we want anything significant to happen in our life. If we like how it is, okay. But I would argue that there's always another level of, not like a burnout, you've got to keep going until you're dead, that crazy workout, but there's always another level. There's no stopping point in the growth mindset, as we come back to your first words, that really makes a huge difference. So
yeah, and it's that healthy striving versus perfectionism or just shutdown. It's that healthy striving that I feel like you were just describing, that consistent dedication just to strive for more.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So thank you so much for being here, Tiffany. It's been an honor.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Intentional Way. I'm Bryan Hatch, and it's been a true privilege to share this time with you. If today's episode has inspired you in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe, follow, and download our episodes. Your support not only helps us grow, it also enables us to bring more insightful conversations and exceptional guests right to you. Living intentionally begins with a single step, yours. So let's make the most of it. Until next time, seek intention by being completely present.